Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we will begin a 5-part video series where I will walk you through how to create your very first quilt. In the first video, we will be putting together your quilt top. The second video, we will base your quilt. The third video, we will actually do the quilting. In the fourth video, I will show you how to trim the quilt and make the quilt binding. And the fifth and final video, we will actually attach the binding to the quilt. I will put in the comments or in the information about this video all of the materials that you will need. So you will obviously need fabric. We'll need fabric, of course, for the quilt top. Because this is a beginner video, I am suggesting that you start with pre-cut fabric. And based on the size of the quilt, 42.5 inches by 42.5 inches, you will need to use charm packs. Charm packs are pre-cut pieces of fabric that are 5 inches by 5 inches in size. Each pack comes with 42 squares of fabric. For this particular quilt and the size that we're going for, you will need 81 squares. You will also need fabric for the border that we will be adding. The border will go around your actual squares. We'll of course need batting, material for the backing, and material for the binding. All of the details of the size of yardage, the material that you would need for those different things, I will link below. Of course, you'll also need a sewing machine. I am suggesting that you have a cutting mat so that you don't damage any of your furniture. That will be important when we go to trim your quilt, as well as when we're preparing the quilt binding. An iron will be good, and that's something that we will use in the first video as we're putting the quilt top together. Thread, of course, thread of your choice. I do not suggest that you go out and buy the most expensive thread. So I do suggest you buy quilting thread. Also, I suggest that you read the instruction manual for your actual sewing machine so that you're using the appropriate needle and thread for your machine. I think you will need basting pins or safety pins to actually, when we get to the basting step, and we're going to talk more about that in video number 2. I also suggest that you use basting adhesive. However, that can become expensive once you get into quilting more often and needing to buy that. So I think it will be good for us to start with the pins so you'll get a feel for how to baste your quilt using pins. You will, of course, need a walking foot. Hopefully one of those was included with your sewing machine. And when we get to the quilting video, I'll go into more detail on the walking foot and show you what mine looks like. So in this first video, we will be piecing together the quilt top. So, pick your fabric. I have already selected the fabric that I will be using. And on my design wall behind me, I will lay out the squares and show you the design that I am going with. And then I'll just kind of walk you through that process. So one of the things that I do suggest when you are, after you've laid out your quilt top the way that you think that you want it, is that you kind of step back and take a more global look at it to make sure the squares are arranged in a manner that you like. There's also suggestions and tips that you take a picture of the design once you've determined what you like. One, so that you can have a reference. So as you're moving those pieces of material from your design board or floor or wherever you're laying out your actual quilt top, as you're taking them to your sewing machine, you don't get distracted or thrown off with regard to how you've actually had it laid out. Another good reason to take a picture of the quilt top once you have it laid out in the way that you think that you want it is so that you can then look at that picture in black and white and you can get a different visual of the quilt in terms of the values of the fabric, right? So whether or not you have too many dark value fabrics together, too many light value fabrics, that's something that looking at it in black and white, it helps to see that pretty clearly. Yep, so let's get started. So I'm going to pause this video and then I'm going to lay out my squares the way that I want my quilt top to look, and then I will come back and show that to you. As I am getting my machine ready to begin piecing the quilt top, it occurred to me that I have made a few assumptions, so I do want to address them. So I have assumed that you know how to thread your sewing machine. So if that's something that's new for you, please do make sure that you follow your instruction manual for the steps in which you need to follow to thread your particular machine. So I won't be walking through that because I do recognize that everyone potentially uses a different type of sewing machine. So definitely follow your instructions manual for how to thread your machine properly. Okay, so now that I have laid out my squares in the way that I would like them to look, I'm going to begin taking them to my sewing machine to stitch them. Now, the way that I prefer to stitch them once I have them laid out is to stitch them in terms of columns. So I will flip one side to the other, right sides together. So then I will then be able to take, like as an example, like this, I will flip all of the fabrics in this row and then, or this column, I should say, and take them to the sewing machine and stitch them and then bring them back together and piece the quilt top together column by column. So hopefully that makes sense, and it will become more clear as you see me go through it. Okay, so in this case, I will have 4 separate columns that I will stitch together, and then I will bring them back up to the design board. Because this is a 9 by 9 block of quilts, and there is this 9th column here that I will add in separately. So stick with me and you'll see how this all comes together. Now that we have our fabric at our sewing machine, we're going to begin the process of actually stitching it. We will be stitching it with a 1/4 inch seam. Now that I have completed sewing each of the columns, so I have them block by block, and I can show you that, I will begin to put together the actual rows. So uh, this is the first block pair in the first row, and then I will attach that to the next pair here, and then I will attach it to the third pair, the fourth pair, and if you recall from the beginning of the video, there is the one single block that will be attached at the end of, well, it's a little bit off camera here, that will be attached after this last block here, so that I have 9 blocks in each row. So I am going to begin that process now, and then I will come back to you. So I will speed that up. Now that I've completed piecing together each of the blocks for the rows, I've laid them out again here on the design wall just to make sure that I've pieced it correctly, so I can see that the layout is as I had intended. The next step will be to take each of these rows and at each seam to sew this, or I should say to press the seam. So I particularly like to press my seams open. Some people like to press them to either one side, or the dark side or the light side. there's a thought that helps in terms of when you're lining up each row together to make sure that your corners are crisp. For me, that method doesn't work very well, so I like to sew my seams open and then I pin to make sure that as I'm sewing the rows together, that the corners actually made up, match, and meet. So I will show you that process. For now, I'm going to take each row over to the iron and I will press each of the seams open. I will press them open with a dry, hot iron. I will not be using any steam or spray starch at this point because I don't want the shape of the blocks to be impacted by either the steam or the spray starch. So I will come back to you once I have all of the seams pressed open, and then I will show you the next step, which is to then begin to pin each of the rows together and sewing them together. So more to come. Now that the seams are all sewn open, it is now time to begin to stitch each of the rows so that we put together the entire front of the quilt top. The next step here is to pin the two rows to each other such that the points will form and they are perfectly aligned. So I will show you how I do that. Again, with the seams both being pressed open, the idea or the key is to line each of the seams up and then to pin on one side. So hopefully you can see what I'm talking about here. So I've lined up the seams there, and now I will pin them so that they remain in place. And you're just going to go down and do that to each of the blocks, and you want to get them connected and pinned. I like to pin on the right side. Okay, so now each of the blocks are pinned together. I will take this over to my sewing machine and I will stitch it using a 1/4 of an inch stitch. Okay, now that the two rows are sewn together, we'll just do a quick check here where we can look to see how we did with getting our corners together. This does not look too bad to me. So I think we're ready to move on. So And what I'm going to do now is to just continue to sew together each of the rows. So um, I like to do them in even groups. So I'll do these 2 rows, I'll do 2 more rows and 2 rows until I get to the last one, the 9th one, and then I'll come back and begin to put them together, like 4 and 4 together, and then the last row. And then after all of the rows are sewn together, I will take the quilt top over to the iron, and I will again press all of the seams open, and then we'll be ready for the next step. So I'm going to just continue sewing the rows together. I'm probably going to speed that up so that you're not bored just watching that in regular time, and then we'll come back together once that's done. Okay, so now I have the rows sewn together. You can see that the first 2 rows, third and fourth, fifth and sixth, seventh and eighth are sewn together. The next thing that I will do is I will sew rows 1 and 2 together with 3 and 4. Again, this is what I was talking about earlier, doing 2 rows at a time and then 4 at a time. For me, it just is easier to go through and manage going through the machine when it's a bit more symmetric in terms of what's on either side. So I'm going to sew these 2 blocks together, and then I will sew these blocks together, and then I will come back and sew 4 and 4, and then the final thing is I will sew on the 9th row, and then we'll have the main body of our quilt top all together. Of course, the first things I will have to do is go through and pin so that each of the corners are matching. Because I've already shown that on camera, I am going to pause the video and I will pick back up um, what I'm sewing. I'll show you the first 2 together. Okay, so more to come. Okay, so the primary half of the quilt top are together. So I will now take the top half and sew it to the bottom half. And then finally, I will sew on the 9th row. Okay, we're one step closer. The quilt top is almost finished. Now we're going to add a border to kind of just frame in the primary design of the quilt top. For this particular border, it's going to be it'll end up being a 1-inch finished border, but what we're going to need is to cut 4 strips that are 1.5 inches by the width of the fabric. I'm going to frame this one in a white border, so I'm going to go and cut that fabric, and then I will be back to show you how to put the border on. I'm going to first start by attaching the borders to either side, right? So on the left side and the right side, you can see I've just kind of pinned it here so you can get a visual of what that will look like. But I will attach it using, again, the same 1.5-inch seam. And then once those are together, we'll do the top and bottom. The quilt top is now completed. All of the blocks have been sewn together, the rows have been sewn together, and now you can see that the border has been included as well. So the next step will be to actually baste the quilt and begin the quilting process. So stick around for video number 2, where we will go into depth on the basting process. Thanks for stitching with me today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more quilting tips and tutorials. Until next time, happy quilting.